Now, staying with Charles, and it's been reported that hundreds of iconic brands face not gaining the King's seal of approval unless they prove their green credentials. The existing and sought-after royal warrants have become void, obviously, when the Queen passed away, and those firms now need to reapply for them. We know that Charles is a conservationist. Does this surprise you?
Absolutely not. I mean, if you know anything about King Charles, this has been probably one of his more consistent and entrenched positions. He's been talking about the environment and protecting it since the 1970s. So this is not something that surprises people. But the pressure that it will have on, household brands that do have the Royal Warrant will be immense. We may very well see brands that we are very familiar and fond of actually disappearing. So, for example, Cadbury may actually not get its royal seal of approval because it doesn't use fair trade cocoa, which is important to the king, obviously, particularly giving the farmers that farm cocoa better working conditions and better pay, better negotiation. We know that Audi, which is owned by VW, they had a scandal a few years ago where they effectively doctored their emissions figures. We could see them come under fire for not meeting the standards of King Charles and who he's willing to award a royal warrant to. We see the likes of Burberry, who a few years ago burnt a lot of their unsold stock. That's again very unenvironmentally friendly. So we're going to actually see a lot of these brands face a lot of pressure. Now we know there's a lot of value in having the Royal Warrant. The estimates that it gives companies a 5% boost in revenue over their competitors. Now, if you contextualize it, a lot of these companies are pulling in revenue in the hundreds of millions of pounds. 5% of that is quite significant. So they will be battling it out. But there's also the flip side of are these standards going to put unnecessary pressure on companies that may not be able to adapt as quickly as King Charles wants? You don't want to involve the royal family in too much politics. And by actually telling businesses how they can run their affairs, you could get into murky waters. So obviously there has to be, I suspect, the onus or the kind of threshold to actually demonstrate that you're being environmentally friendly will not be very high, and I think it will be subject to independent counsel, so it doesn't look like that the king is ordering businesses around. But so far as they demonstrate that isn't their vision, even if they highlight sort of investments that they're willing to make into more environmentally friendly practices, I think that will probably pass the threshold. But it does have impact, and it does definitely stay in the vein of King Charles and his passion for the environment.
Yeah, now one quick last one for our history buffs. Now, Henry V is probably the most popular king there is. He beat the French at Agincourt. It might not seem particularly relevant to Australia, but it's part of our history too. It is actually very relevant. What would have the world looked like if he'd lost? Esther, would we be speaking French?
We probably would have, actually. So there is this weird romanticization of past monarchs. Understandably so, they're still a very significant part of British culture. But actually, you can make that argument with a lot of people. You can make that argument with Queen Elizabeth's father during the time of the Second World War. We will probably likely be speaking German, and I'm not sure what would happen in Australia. You might still be speaking English, but it would have been a very different ball game. So I do find it interesting when we romanticize certain monarchs. There have been a string of monarchs that have not been particularly, or should I say, beneficial to the United Kingdom or our history. One of the most famous ones that come to mind is Henry VIII and his poor wives, and his abrogation from the Catholic Church, which now means we have the Church of England and all of that. So it's interesting when these figures are almost deified, when actually, if one action went wrong, the course of history would have changed significantly. I may not be here. I may not be speaking English. I may not have come from Ghana. So it's important to bear that in mind.